key idea here is that professionals, in fact, anybody in a community of practice, a group of people who solve problems in the world, they think in a particular way. And that way of thinking is something that you can apply not just on the job, but that you can apply to a whole range of problems. So, for example, let's imagine what our medical system would look like if every person in the country understood something about the way a doctor thinks, the kinds of questions they ask, the kind of evidence they look for, the way they make decisions. When they walked into the doctor's office, you'd have a very different set of relationships. What would it be like if every time somebody picked up a newspaper or listened to the radio, they understood something about the way a journalist thinks, why certain stories make news and why certain stories don't, why coverage looks the way it does. I think that those are useful and important life skills in a knowledge economy. In the same way that basic reading, basic literacy, basic mathematics are important skills, both now and also and particularly in an industrial economy.
So, are you suggesting that we should teach mathematics this way, or is epistemic games an add-on to the regular curriculum? And we teach math, and we teach science, and then we have an epistemic game, or can we teach math in an epistemic game?
I think ultimately that we need that a lot of our teaching is going to be through games of this kind. I mean, one way to think about that in terms of math is that right now we spend something like the first 5 or 6 years of a child's mathematical education teaching them to do what a 99-cent calculator can do.
Right.
That seems like a terrible waste of time.
And forgetting it every summer.
Right, that's right, and forgetting it every summer.
Right.
And then every bit of research shows not being very good at it later on.
Yeah, right.
As opposed to learning from the start to use the calculator, to use these tools, to take on the real and interesting problems. I mean, the irony is that for kids, right, the idea that you can actually sit down and like preparing a tax form can be a really cool thing, especially if you're trying to figure out how to save somebody money. Adults, we recognize that as drudgery, but on the other hand, it's a really good way to think about all kinds of numerical problems and numerical issues, and to do complex thinking. And anybody who's a good accountant is not just following the rule book. That's what makes them a good accountant.
And it gets to be a lot less drudgery when you think you're going to save yourself money.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great real world game, right? And it's one we all have to play. So if everybody were better prepared for that, it'd probably be
tension between getting your money back and avoiding jail gives it an edge.
Absolutely.
Now, I've heard you say on a number of occasions that one thing that people miss about games is that the major interest of games is not just that they're fun. Say something about that. I mean, I think so many people think, well, look, games are good because they're fun. Why take the fun away from kids? Because that's really all a game is about, is fun.
Right. Well, I mean, the beauty of it is that in fact that's not what happens. These kinds of games actually are fun, even though they're about real world problems. And part of that is because it turns out that having a sense that you can do something in the world and that you can learn about the way the world really works, you can kind of pull back the curtain and see the way the mechanisms of power function is actually really fun, especially if you're an adolescent. That's what adolescents are all about. But even more than that, I mean, I think we need to move from talking about fun to talking about values. Because what a good game has to do is make you care about the things in the game. Stephen Johnson in the book, Everything Bad is Good for You, makes this great point that in many of the games, the computer and video games that people play, there's a tremendous amount of drudgery.
Right.
In my book, I talk about the fact that football coaches can tell you till they're blue in the face that doing calisthenics is part of the game and fun, but nobody really believes that.
Yeah.
So there's not fun parts of games all the time, and what the game has to do is convince you that you care about the things that matter in the game. And professional training has to do that. Otherwise, nobody would be trained to be professionals.
Right.
So that problem, in a sense, has already been solved.
So isn't that one of the big problems with school? Because I think that's very true of games. I certainly know that any gamer knows that there are times where a game is very frustrating. You're fed up. You want to throw the controller. There are times where it is drudgery. But you really keep going because the game has made you care. It has made you want to solve the problem. It has even given you an investment in an identity or a story or some of the talents and skills you've developed. Yet school has a hard time getting people to go through the tough patches, the frustrating patches. Gamers don't give up, but kids often give up in school.
And to be fair, there are some kids, the kids who don't give up. They succeed in school because ultimately they buy into the idea that getting good grades and good scores on tests, and they see that as a motivation either in itself, where they recognize that that's going to get them into college and get them a good job and all those other kinds of things. The problem is that it fails for too many kids, obviously.
Right.
Just as, not every game succeeds for every kid.
Right.
And I think one of the important things to recognize is that we have to move away from one game of school
right.
with essentially one way of thinking, which is that there are a bunch of right answers and that somebody else has, and I have to learn them so that I can follow along the rules and get a good factory job, basically.
Right. Yeah.
And to be able to play...
Well, not factory anymore, service job.
Right, service job, right. But the reason I say factory is because that's what it was designed for originally. And to move to a world where we have a lot of different games that give people lots of lenses onto the world, lots of what I call epistemic frames and ways of thinking that can be part of their toolkit. And some kids will groove on some, and some kids will groove on others. But if they're all valuable and you come away with some, we'd be a lot better than where we are now.
Yeah, I mean, I often think about the fact that if the gaming industry operated like the schooling industry, it would be broke a long time ago. I mean, if we tried to sell this, not only the same game, but even the same type of game to everybody. Everybody had to play real-time strategy games. Nobody could play shooters. Nobody could play adventure games. The industry would be nothing. But school says everybody plays the same sort of game the same way, and wonders why a significant portion don't much like it.
Yeah.
But going back to the kids you say who, and quite correctly, who buy school and do well in school, there's been evidence that you well know since the 70s that many of those people have an A in their science but can't actually use any of it to solve a problem in the real world. They still fail at applying that knowledge, and so what they've really learned is school science, how to put stuff on a piece of paper. Now, you really can't play, let's say, your urban planning game and fail to come out of it having done anything in urban planning, right?
Right, that's right. And, I mean, that's true of games in general, and one of the very useful things about having games that are very directly modeled on things that matter in the world is that when you get good at playing the game, you also have to be getting good at solving a problem in the real world.
Class of problems.
Right. And what our data shows is that, in fact, kids do just that. That is, they don't just stop at the boundary of the game and say, this was something that I learned just for the game.
Right.
They take that way of thinking on the road with them. And in particular, they take it back to school, and it can be very transformative for how they think about school. They suddenly have a sense that learning is something that matters to them.
Yeah.
They have a way of looking at all kinds of things that gives them kind of a way in. So, kids who have worked as graphic artists have a way of talking in Spanish class when they're looking at art from Spain that gives them a sense of their identity as a knower, as somebody who has some expertise, so that the effects can be really profound and stretch out into.
So surely the skills, for example, you'd pick up in an urban planning game of thinking of complex systems, of interacting variables, of trade-offs. Those are ways of thinking that apply in a lot of areas.
Yes.
And you're equipping the mind with some very important skills.
Right, and showing that in fact, if we carefully measure how kids think about some class of problems before and after the game and then even later on, we actually see that they're applying it to problems that are outside the game but that use the kinds of skills and ways of thinking and values that you would expect that they would have.